Sounds weird. Hi, thank you. I'd like to call to order this workshop of July 15th, 2019. First of all, I hope you all had a great Independence Day weekend, and thank you very much for all being here today. And I especially like to thank Evan Sear, Chair of the Planning Board, as well as the other Planning Board members that are here. Just so we make sure we know everybody, if we could just go around the room, starting from the left. Myself, Jason Lebeck, Mayor.
Peter Creighton, City Manager.
Andy Titus, City Council, Ward 3.
Eric Cousins, Deputy Director of Economic and Community Development.
Councilman Leroy Walker.
Brian Carrier, Planning Board.
Katie Boss, Planning Board.
Bob Hayes, Ward 2, Council.
Belinda Gary, Auburn City Councilor at Large.
Holly Lasagna, Ward 1, City Councilor.
Alfreda Fournier, Ward 4, Councilor and School Committee Member.
David Young, City Councilor at Large.
Stephen Martelli, Planning Board.
Evan Sear, Planning Board.
John Engler, Planning Board.
Great. Well, thank you very much for all being here. I'm glad we did this. This is the first time in this current City Council term that we've had a joint Planning Board City Council workshop. It has been done historically. Hopefully it can be done in the future as well. We have a very brief, if you would, or I want to say loose agenda. First thing we're going to talk about right now is going to turn over to Eric Cousins and Chairman Sear to talk about environmental performance standards ordinance. Then after that, we're going to talk about the potential formation of an agricultural advisory committee. And then we're going to start looking at some goal making priorities, what we want to accomplish as individuals and working together. So with that, I will turn it off to Mr. Cousins and Mr. Sear to commence.
Eric, I think it might be helpful if you sort of describe what's being proposed by the Planning Board first, and then myself and the other Planning Board members can discuss how we came to that.
Great, thank you. The Planning Board and City Council looked at an odors ordinance, and the interest in this really was sparked by the marijuana licensing ordinances and opting into the marijuana businesses as the state allows. But the odor ordinance that we had was very basic, and it essentially said if you can smell the business at the property line, it's a violation. So we looked at a lot of different models. Certain odors people tend to find offensive, others they don't. Technically, under the old ordinance, if you could smell burgers next to Burger King, the business was in violation, or donuts next to a business. The initial draft of the odors ordinance, the model was fairly subjective and suggested that we assemble a team of staff sniffers, essentially, to go to the site and determine if an odor is offensive at the property line. The council initially had a workshop and first reading on that while we were waiting for the Planning Board to finalize a recommendation. And the Planning Board, I think for a lot of good reasons, decided that we had to look at ways to make the ordinance less subjective and really more measurable as far as what type of an odor is a violation. So the Planning Board and Audrey Knight as staff worked closely on updating an ordinance that actually requires a tool to measure the concentration of odors, but it makes the standard much more measurable and less subjective, less of a decision of people just deciding whether or not an odor is troublesome at the property line. So the Planning Board worked through that ordinance at their last meeting a week ago tomorrow. And what you have in front of you now is an odor ordinance that will require that we purchase an olfactory meter, is what it's called. In your packet, you can see a picture of it. It's almost like a cone that goes over your nose, and it measures, as a human inhales through that cone, it measures the concentration of the odors and sets thresholds that are consistent with the way that other communities have decided to deal with odors in a very measurable way rather than a subjective way. The ordinance also, the original draft had a very specific enforcement process to the odors ordinance. The new draft really follows the standard process where if we receive a complaint, and in this case for odors it would be 3 complaints, then we would notify the property owner that there's been a complaint and that there's an issue, and we would then go to the site and measure whether or not the odor is strong enough to be in violation of the ordinance, and then establish a timeline for them to take steps to mitigate those odors. It would also allow, if the person was not willing or company was not willing to mitigate them, it would allow for the traditional enforcement techniques of either fines issued by staff or legal action in the court system. So in that way, it's very consistent with the way that we treat other code enforcement matters. And again, it's measurable now rather than subjective, the decision of people at the property line. So I think it's a great improvement over the first draft that the council and planning board saw, but it is substantially different, and we felt that it made sense to have a new first reading at the council level, now that we have a positive recommendation from the planning board, and then have a second reading and public hearing at the council level as well, because the changes were substantive from the initial reading of the older ordinance. With that, I'd be happy to hear any additional feedback or any things that I missed from
Mr. Chair?
planning board.
I think what you're hearing from Mr. Cousins is absolutely on point. With respect to specific concerns we had, I think it's fair to say that in general the board was worried that this odor ordinance was specifically geared towards adult use marijuana, and we felt that it was sort of inappropriate to have something so specific, given that it applies to all zones and all businesses in the city. If you read it in conjunction with the rest of that article within the zoning ordinance, it really stood out. It was incredibly long. The standards, correct me if I was wrong, some of the standards were specific to the medical marijuana.
Yeah, there was a
industry.
mention to code around HVAC for indoor horticultural systems and stuff.
Yeah, it was incredibly specific, and so Audrey Knight did an incredible job taking our feedback and going back and coming back with something that really fit with the rest of the ordinance. That allowed us to feel comfortable that if we approved it, we weren't targeting a single industry. That used a specific measurable metric. That was really important. That was one of the things that the board expressed to staff, and that she did her homework and found a tool and a specific metric that's not made up here locally. It's something that's used and widely used across the nation, and is understood as a standard. So with that, I'll leave it up to the council to ask questions. From this point on, if any of the members of the board feel comfortable answering one of the councilor's questions, I'd encourage you to jump in and provide an answer.
Council, any questions? Councilor Zanya?
I want to make a comment that I was here to see the presentation, and that Audrey Knight did a really incredible job, so much research on it, and thank you to the planning board and Chairperson Sear for requesting it and getting what they needed and moving forward with it. It was complicated.
Well, thank you for the credit, but it's the board that requested it. So.
Councilor Fournier?
Similarly, I mean, when I reviewed that, I noticed that in places where it was really important, it was made certain that it would not target just one specific product, and I think you have many other products that also equally give us some issues. I think that you've thought about that all along the way, and as I was looking at it with a critical eye, I really couldn't see anything where I would make any suggestions. I mean, it was really great. It's very comprehensive, and I think there's a lot of wiggle room there, so thank you very much. A lot of work.
Is there any other comment from the council or questions directly related to this, to planning board? None? Okay. Thank you for this. And this is going to be coming up, our next meeting scheduled for vote, I believe?
I believe it will, August 19th.
19th meeting?
The council sets August 19th as a meeting.
Yeah, we have that to be discussed later on. So the next meeting we have in August, this will be on the agenda. Okay, so thank you. I believe this is the last big hurdle to overcome with recreational and medicinal medicine, marijuana usage ordinances. Good times. So very good. We're going to move on then to the presentation actually by Councilor Lasagna on Ag Committee ordinance, and Mr. Manager too, I believe.
So this is a process, and the people who participated were Donald and Sally Peck, Camille Parrish, David Young, Eric Cousins, Peter Creighton, and myself, and we met twice, and we had some good conversation and actually much more quickly than we had imagined came to a suggested Ag Advisory Committee ordinance. I'm going to just touch on a couple of highlights. I think we're going to get the actual proposed ordinance up on here. While that, great, thank you. A couple of things. The mission is to advance an agricultural, forestry, and natural resources related economies in the Ag and Resource Protection Zoning District. I'm going to read a couple of these because I want to make sure that I articulate very clearly some of the points that we wanted to highlight. One of the specific duties is to review the Auburn Comprehensive Plan, city ordinances and policies to be sure that they're advantageous to building a strong agriculture, forestry, and natural resource economy in the Ag and Resource Protection Zoning District, to promote opportunities for farm and forestry-related business, financing, and encourage marketing of Auburn's agricultural and forestry products, to highlight to monitor trends in residential permitting, promote adherence to ordinances, and adjudicate special permission consistent with its authority within the Agriculture and Resource Protection Zoning District, develop collaborative relationships with organizations with similar purposes that lead to understanding and developing best practices and policies to strengthen agriculture and forestry economies, to communicate regularly with the public, planning board, and city council, to work with others to educate the community regarding food systems, agriculture, and forestry, and opportunities to support these enterprises, and to review applications for the Voluntary Municipal Farm Support Program. Peter, anything to add?
No, I think you've set it up well. I think maybe we could see if anyone has any questions or concerns or comments.
I'd like to open this up. Anybody? Questions, concerns, comments, suggestions, clarification? I've run out of adjectives.
With reference to the adjudication, was there a thought in mind as to the sorts of things that might be coming before the Ag Committee that they would be taking action on?
We didn't talk about specifics, and I'm not sure, I don't know if Eric can answer when we talked about adjudication. It defers to the planning board for the final decision on some things, and our capacity to adjudicate, Eric, was based on.
Yes, some of it depends on how the remainder of the ag ordinances are laid out, and I think one of the ones that kept coming up was determining if a proposed land use is a farm under the definition for the purposes of building an accessory residence. That was one of the potential decisions that this group would make, to look at a business plan and a land use proposal and determine whether or not it is a farm under the ordinance.
Just something to keep in mind when we're looking at that. I do believe we already have committees, i.e. the Planning Board Appeals Committee, that can look at any exemptions to current ordinances and so forth. I get concerned, and I remember history class at Edward Little, and I get concerned with having a committee dictate whether or not others can join them. It sounds like Jim Crow. You know, a committee to dictate, I know you may shake your head here, but think about it. A committee to dictate whether or not someone else is worthy enough of voting in Alabama in the 1930s, okay, bypassing some sort of test, some sort of arbitrary benchmark. That is what this smells like. Not to go back to the olfactory sensor, but that concerns me. I think it should concern all of us. We shouldn't have a group of 5 people to say whether or not this person or that person can be my neighbor.
Well, I'm offended by the use of Jim Crow, but I'll leave that aside. And I don't really understand what you are objecting to. This group will make recommendations to the planning board about what they think should happen.
Adjudication. Making a decision on whether or not someone should or should not have a farm dwelling.
Right.
That's the term. Recommendations? Okay. Adjudication? That's power. And that concerns me.
Can I ask a point of clarification? I hate to jump in here, but it would be helpful for me, and I don't know about the rest of the planning board members, to know who sort of makes those determinations now, because someone still has to determine that if someone wants to build a residence in the ag zone. Who is responsible for that, and what is the process that they currently follow?
Mr. Cousins, you want to address that, please?
Yes, staff in the planning department is responsible for that now. Right now, it's with the 50% income standard. We've received very few applications, but we rely on tax return documents and business plan if the farm is not constructed. And it's a very black and white decision on whether or not the numbers exceed 50% of the person's income.
And it's based specifically on the way the ordinance is written?
Yes, it is.
Could I ask a following clarifying question? Of course. So I assume that a change in that was seen as beneficial by, as you were putting this together. Otherwise, I assume you wouldn't have, suggested that process be changed. So would you mind clarifying, or are you able to provide clarification as to why it was seen as desirable to take that out of the realm of the planning staff and put that into, put that as one of the responsibilities of the Ag Committee instead?
Are you speaking specifically about adjudication or just making recommendations?
Well, I'm speaking specifically about sort of determining whether something might be a farm or something to that effect.
Well, again, I go back to recommendation.
Okay.
Board that would make the final determination based on what comes out of the new ordinance that would be created.
Was that desirable to ask the planning board? I guess because right now we don't make those determinations. So I'm all new to us, right? At least at the planning board. And so I'm just trying to ask questions as to help us understand the desire to sort of change that process, or why it might be beneficial for us to get involved in a process that we're not involved in now, that's all.
Well, I'll say one thing, and then Peter, maybe you can also clarify. Part of it is it's very complicated. As we know, I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know. And for us to have information, I think even when it came initially to the planning board, it was so complicated about how we determine this. The responsibility of this group is to have people who can inform the group and thus inform the planning board about what the recommendations are. And I know it's changing the process.
But recommendations for zoning changes?
That I absolutely understand. I guess I'm asking, is the intent that the planning board would now become involved in determining whether or not someone's business plan was a farm? Mr. Hayes looks like he wants to weigh in.
If I might, actually, you are in that process. I mean, the ordinances allow staff to go to a certain point on approving plans, for instance. But plans that, by size or acreage or size of building or whatever, it comes to the board for review and approval. So I think that you are in that position currently.
Well, we're in the position to affect the ordinance itself, but I've never known a situation where we were in a position to determine whether or not someone met the threshold for being a farm.
Well, but a subdivision, you do. You're at that threshold. You decide whether a subdivision will go forward or not.
So you're seeing it as sort of an effort to sort of bring it more congruent with the way we might deal with a subdivision or a special exception or site
I
plan?
mean, we're going to be working with an ordinance, and I think that, you know, we're looking at another group that has knowledge of agricultural activities. I think the real crux of the problem is going to come, you know, if we get away from the 50% rule, which I think we all agree we need to find another way of governing, you know, what's going to be an agricultural use and, you know, allow such a use. So yes, that decision to go forward with that use, but then what happens was when the use may fail, then what happens to structures or residents that's on the property now, but there's no farming activity, which I don't know if we are actually at that point of even
I think the
addressing.
staff deals with that as well, like what happens next.
Councilor Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm a little concerned because we're fitting what I consider to be a very complex issue into a very short workshop. I'm really concerned.
And we can have more. We
No, I
can
wish
take as much time as
we have
possible
time
on this.
because this is,
Yeah.
but from the very beginning of the ag study, I tried to push for us to have an agenda and goals for any research that we were doing involving the ag zone, and we never did. From the very beginning, from the original study, it was all this broad-based 15 pages of things we want to accomplish with an ag study and an ag committee, so what happens is we keep coming back to ground zero because nobody really knows what we want to do. Do we want a management committee, or do we want an advisory committee? This sounds like a management committee that's going to be managing the ag zone and then giving recommendations to planning board, who then, I mean, to me, we have to decide which way we want to go. Otherwise, we're going to be going up against the wall every time this comes up. If we want an advisory only and to come up with ways that you'll present to council to help you utilize the ag zone better, that's one kind of committee. But if you're talking about one that with adjudication powers and management, now you're talking about a commission, that's a totally different road. But we seem to haven't decided which way we want to go. And that's why we keep hitting a brick wall, especially where we only have 10 minutes left of a half-an-hour workshop.
And this can,
And
just to
5
address
more
the time,
items.
we're going to do this to obviously standard and not to time. If we need to have another workshop, we can do that in the future, okay? Absolutely. On that, I do would like to reference the initial resolution the council passed in driving staff and Councilor Lozani to do this work, that I believe it stated, I'd like to pull it up, advisory commission. So non-adjudication, if you would. So I want to make sure that's clear. I'd like to research, I could be wrong on that, though. I'm going to go with Mr. Carrier, then I'll come back to you, Mrs. Forney. Okay?
I guess I understand Bob's point, where going forward, where the planning board would deal with the process, because we have to approve that it meets the stipulations that we set forth in the code and everything. But are you saying that this commission would also deal with the backside of the issue? Because I'm sure right now, out in the agricultural zone, we have areas that are no longer farming, that are in the farming zone. So would this committee, as you guys are envisioning it, would they help in that part of it, or would they help staff with that part of it? Or, because that becomes an adjudication process that you would be dealing with the staff about. You'd have to go out and say, well, you're no longer meeting if we stay with the 50% rule, which is ludicrous at this point, but do you see that as part of the job, is helping the staff with that part of the job?
So for clarification, when you say the back end, you mean previous sort of
Well, the back
land
end, I mean,
use that is?
we can approve anything today. Bob could come to us and today, I'm going to farm this land, I'm going to put trees over here, and I'm going to put, crops here, but after we approve the plan, who goes back and looks at it? Because staff is looking forward to other issues. We don't go back to look to see, it's only when that issue is brought forward. But brought forward by who? So are you envisioning the committee being able to do that, to bring it forward to the staff that there's an issue with this? Or, because again, I mean, I can see us doing the front part of the work because that's part of the planning board job. But I think that all of this falls back to, as Andy said, who's going to enforce this? Who's going to make sure that you're making 10% of your income from it and you're actually using 3 acres of land for the farming, and you've actually, I mean, somebody's going to be able to enforce it. We can talk all day long about this is the way it should be, but who's going to enforce it? Because if nobody's going to enforce this, then we're just spitting in the wind.
Well, and I think one of the things to realize that this is to set up an ag advisory committee that will address those issues.
Yeah.
And that's
I'm sorry, what do you mean address who should enforce?
not specifically that, but any of the issues that are coming up. This ordinance right here does not address specifics around that.
Okay.
Who's going to enforce it? Who's going to do this? This ordinance here is to create a committee, an advisory committee, that will then go through a process to determine, come up with a charter and figure out what their responsibility is for this. And there will be input on that as well, once the committee is created.
Come up with a chart. If I could, city manager wants to, you
I have
want
a
to jump in?
follow-up question regarding that, Councilor Lasagna. At the very beginning, it starts out as being advisory and research-based, that kind of thing, but then toward the end, the very last paragraph confuses me, and it's dealing with appeals. It says, an appeal from any final decision of the committee as to any matter over which it has final authority may be taken by any party to the Board of Appeals. So what is the authority embedded within this? It sounds like the role would be more authoritarian.
So, Peter,
I could probably speak to that as well.
Go ahead if you want, Eric. I'll follow up.
If this committee is given final decision-making authorities, and I think that's what we're here to talk about, to decide if that's what the community wants, that's what the council wants or not. If they are, then there should be some way for somebody aggrieved by a decision, a final decision of this committee, to appeal that decision. Planning board right now would go to Superior Court. Any staff level decision would go to the Board of Appeals if they were aggrieved by a decision or disagreed with it for some reason. We talked a little bit about using the Board of Appeals as the appeals board for a decision from this committee, but what that would do is really, you'd go to this ag committee, you'd get a decision that you're unhappy with for some reason, and then you would bring it to a board that really doesn't have a background in agriculture, and maybe that's not the best group to do that. So this was left open as something that still needs to be ironed out, where, and if this group is a recommending body and doesn't have any final decision-making authority, then there's no need for an appeals process.
You will say, if I could just add some clarity to that, the planning board or the Board of Appeals doesn't have specific interest or knowledge in anything. For example, if Tam Brands had a planning board issue, a permitting issue, are members of the Board of Appeals sufficiently knowledgeable in feminine hygiene to make those decisions? Probably not. A little tongue-in-cheek there, but again, we don't have a committee that adjudicates or makes decisions for any other economic activity in the city.
I would want to correct you on that one. We have the Complete Streets, which makes decisions that we had to, actually, somebody came to council and had to appeal their decision.
You're right, they didn't.
And if we hadn't done that, or he hadn't come to council, then that decision would have been final.
You're right.
And I'm not sure if I like that with the Complete Streets even. So to have that kind of authority in the ag zone without the planning board being involved,
Right.
I'm scared with it, that's all.
Okay. I'm always cautious of having a certain committee that actually has power, and especially it's made up of a majority members of its own, if you would, zone. I mean, we all have to realize that the agriculture and resource protection zone is not a separate municipality. It is part of Auburn. Okay, it's an integral part of Auburn with 40% of our land mass, and to have it governed by its own town council, so to speak, at that point, I mean, really, what are we looking at here? I don't think that precedent should be, or has been made, nor should it, not in the fifth largest city of the state. So is there, Mr. Manager, you had some comments?
Yes, and I know that we have only a little bit of time left for this, and it was never intended that this would be the final conversation on this before it goes to the council for the council to act on. This is an important discussion, as we all know. We've been looking at the ag zone going back to 2017 in particular. The idea behind this, if you look at the different powers and duties, people have focused in on the adjudication part, but this is intended to enhance what we're doing in terms of agriculture in the community and to try and help promote it and find ways to help those who are involved in agriculture and forestry in Auburn to be able to have more success in terms of what they're doing. We are, I think, looking for everyone's thoughts on how far do we go in terms of what this advisory committee is going to do. And I think we had 2 meetings. The conversation tonight is a healthy conversation. It's an important one. We can meet again as a working group, have a discussion about what we've heard tonight, and then come back to the council and the planning board if that's what people would like. Does that make sense, Councilor?
Do you think it would be helpful to read the entire proposed ordinance to get a real sense that this adjudication was almost boilerplate that we took from something else to put there, and if that's a problem, definitely address it. But if you look overall, it really is to support and promote healthy agriculture and healthy agricultural systems in this community. And again, this would be to create an advisory board. We haven't hammered out all the details here, that the advisory board would then have a lot of input and information to then be able to make recommendations.
Is it possible to have a chart that would show the process as to where a decision begins, where it goes through, who is involved in it, and who ultimately makes the decision, and then the appeal process, so that, like an organizational chart, so to speak.
Actually, it's a great idea.
I think that's
Yeah, I'd love
important,
that.
but it's something that the Ag Advisory
Yeah.
Board would be creating.
No, absolutely. This is something that would match what our roles and responsibilities. I think, Councilor Forney, if I could speak
Checks
for you.
and balances
Checks
is
and
what I'm
balances, but
looking at.
What are the potential variable, not the potential variables, give us some case studies if you would. Farmer A or potential Farmer A comes, okay, to the city of Auburn. What's the process that they follow? Flow chart this out, and, yes approval, no approval, meet the requirements, yes, doesn't meet the requirements, no. What are some of the scenarios in which this Ag Advisory Committee would actually interact or interface with potential new and existing farmers? If that's, and again, I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
Okay.
that's exactly what I was thinking.
I mean, sometimes I love the visualization and the charting effect, Visio, if you would.
There are many
Just helps.
facets to this, and there are a lot of people and organizations involved. And I think that, it's always healthy to have, a global picture and breaking it down in terms of giving people opportunity to weigh in before a decision is made, because any decision is going to have an impact one way or the other.
We certainly can do that, and it'll be helpful also to have some planning board input on that, just so that it aligns with your process.
Great.
And
I was just going to ask, since it sounds like this is meant to be advisory and help the planning board make decisions, I was going to ask respectfully that we be given time to discuss this in a board meeting so that we can think about what would be helpful to us from such a committee. What sorts of things do we struggle with specific to the ag zone? And also to allow us, it sounds like the idea of adjudication is going to be a contentious one, and quite frankly, it deals specifically with authorities that are already delegated to the planning board, so I would really like the opportunity for the planning board to be able to discuss our opinions on that as well. So I understand that you're trying to move forward with this.
Well, no, we want to take time.
Okay.
We want to make sure that it's right.
I will, and any planning board member can put anything on our agenda, but I would assume that every planning board member at this table right now would jump up to put this on our agenda for next month, because I think if it's meant to help us, it's important for us to articulate to those writing the ordinance what sorts of help we think we need.
Yeah, and I appreciate
make
that, and
sense?
that really, the bottom line is, this proposed group would make recommendations and give you information so that you could make an informed decision about these really important and complex issues.
Okay, I think that's next steps, just to kind of put this in summarization here. Agenda item for next month's, I believe next month, your planning board meeting. You guys are going to talk about it, and girls, great. Councilor Zania, you and the city manager will look at that maybe post-fact, have another follow-up meeting, and take everything that's been said here tonight, and at the further or future planning board meeting, and take that into consideration.
Sure.
Great, okay, so that's that for that topic. Thank you very much for the work that you and the rest of the committee have put in this so far. Always a good process, but I tell you, the first draft is always the hardest. So let's move on. I'm going to turn this over to Chairman Sear here. Talk about some bullet points, and go for it.
Okay, and I apologize. It looks like we sort of went B, C, and we're back to A. And so I'm gonna throw these things out, and I really need my members to sort of weigh in and help me if I forget something here. Okay. We don't often get a chance to meet with the council. I'm not sure I've done it, but maybe once while I was on the board. So it's interesting that Mr. Titus brings up sort of defining goals. One of the things I think really helped us in making our recommendation with regard to the proposed ag zone ordinance is that we developed metrics for ourselves that sort of defined what criteria we felt it had to meet in order for us to feel comfortable with it. And I think that that should be an ongoing discussion with the city council, and I would assume that the rest of the planning board would agree that I think it would be helpful for us if the city council were able to go through a similar process and sort of develop criteria that we could see that are hard and fast. We put those in writing so that we had to be beholden to them. And right now the process from the council is moving forward, but I'm not sure that the planning board has seen a specific direction that the council wants that zone to go in, or a specific set of metrics that it's using to measure its decisions. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, let me, if I could interject too, and I'm going to use Councilor Hayes' example and his statement a little bit earlier tonight. I'm going to paraphrase, of course. We're talking about the 50% income rule. We all can kind of agree that that's something that needs to be changed. That was an initial recommendation from the Crossroads report almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago. That would be a criteria. I do think that we should have in the immediate future and really kind of organize what our goals are. And if we want to do it now and just kind of get a couple on the table and talk about it as a group, I think that's great. What are our goals? And I think if you look back, just to start that conversation off, if you look back at the ordinance as it stands right now, the goal is of the agricultural resource and protection zone, I'm going to paraphrase this one, is to enhance the farming economy in the city of Auburn. There's a lot of other stuff in there as well, but enhance the agricultural industry in the city of Auburn. And we've talked about that in the mayor's ad hoc, talked about it in the past mayor's ad hoc, talked about it during the Crossroads study. One thing I've seen that is lacking in a lot of what we've talked about is a concrete, okay, if this happens, there is a better than likely chance that farming will increase. Okay, that is something that it's been a lot of no's or negatives, and I think it's because we haven't had that goal kind of approved or we've wrapped around, coalesced around. Do we want to see more farms in Auburn? Okay, if that's the case, then we need to look at, that's our goal, how do we make that happen? I think we have enough information, and your guest speakers at the planning board were great. I mean, from the state of Maine, you had a lot of good information. It's been cathartic this last 2 years, I know for me specifically, because there's been so much information and everything's bubbled to the surface, so to speak. And you know, I can almost argue that it's not a complicated situation, it's an emotional situation. And there's an emotional, a level of emotion there that you don't normally see in a lot of planning or land use discussions. So, with that said, what do we think, based upon 2 years of knowledge now, okay, and work, more actually, that some of the goals, or one of the goals of any work on modernizing the ordinances for ag zone should be? There's no wrong answer. Counselor.
I don't want to completely uncouple resource protection. I want to make sure that we're also discussing resource protection as, in addition to, as you said, if increasing agriculture is one of the things that we want to talk about.
It's agricultural and resource protection. So I think they're coupled.
Okay.
The resource there is ag. I mean, let's talk about definitions are important. Councilor Hayes, you always used to, what did you say about agricultural resource? You said it in several council meetings.
Over many years, you're right, it's written as the agriculture and resource protection zone, and ordinances are addressed that way. Most often, unfortunately, it's been reduced to the ag zone. And resource protection is the key point. And resources, there's many of them. And there's natural resources, but also it's the resources that we have as a community, our infrastructure. We developed this ordinance really as a way of controlling growth, so we didn't have sprawl, because we don't have the resources to sustain that type of growth. So I think that, you know, historically, we have built from the core. We try to grow, you know, concentrically outward. So instead of lurching off in this direction and that direction, where then we have to support those tentacles, it'd be very difficult, be very costly. So I think over time, we grow outward. We try to fill in, let our infrastructure support that growth. So I think that, again, we've got to emphasize, I think as Holly's suggested, it's the resources that we have this ordinance to protect. And that's, you know, the natural resources, it's the infrastructure, and our ability to sustain.
So if we start, just for hypothetically, if we start decoupling, we talk about sprawl. I think if you get this down, what's the definition of sprawl? Today, if we had 50 families 50 Amish families moved to Auburn, like they have in other communities in Maine. And they decided that they're going to start and cut down 500 acres of trees and start farming. That's a perfectly allowable activity within this zone. Is that sprawl if we had 50 new farm dwellings in Auburn?
Where are they?
In the ag zone?
Right, again, it comes down to, are we going to have a farm here, a farm there, or are we going to have a farming community that it also then begins to recognize within that area that they want to farm, there are other resources that even within that has to be protected. Water bodies. There may be some, well, and we've debated this industrial park we have. There are historical artifacts too that we run into on various projects. So I
Right
think
now, today, 50 separate lots bought throughout 20,000 acres of ag land. 50 farmers could start tomorrow.
if they come in and want to create a farming community, that's one thing.
No,
If
they
you're-
don't. They don't.
Scattered development, but then it comes down to making sure that it is a true agricultural productive use. And I think it then comes down to defining within ordinance, how do we define that?
Would the planning board take that situation up if someone, and this is just, I think it's important to break this down.
I'm not
What's
sure that's in
sprawl?
our purview. I think that if someone came and met the letter of the law as currently written, the planning board wouldn't be involved at all. It would defer to staff to make sure that they're meeting those requirements, and then they'd be allowed to proceed.
Yeah, I think if a family came to us and said, we earn all of our household income from farming, this is what we've done for years, this is our plan, and it looked like they would do that, we would issue the approval for. And that really only comes into question when they're asking to build a residence in the ag zone. Anybody could go start farming a piece of land without coming to see us, but if they're earning more than half their household income, and a lot of Amish families earn their entire income off of the farm, they would get an approval.
I use this maybe as an extreme example, the wake up tomorrow and there's 50 new farmers, but in theory, that can happen today. Would we want that? And I think that's a question of, do we want farming in Auburn? Or do we want this to be a resource, an environmental resource that's protected? It's the decoupling, I think, is important.
I don't think it's fair to ask us to try and theorize about this right now. That's part of the reason that we're going through these processes, is to really think critically about it with input on this. I mean, we could say yes or no to, in theory, what you're putting out there.
It's about just understanding the reality, I think, of the nature of where we're currently standing. It's also to stimulate some conversation, because I think the definitions of what's tripping everybody up. Development versus farm home, sprawl versus farms. Looking back at how many acres we had in production in 1964 that were deforested versus today. So we don't, and to Chairman Sears' point, I think a lot of people made this point, we don't know what Councilor Titus did. We don't have a goal. I personally think that we need more farming to help combat food insecurity. Okay, I think we need more farms in Auburn. Great. I don't think that's an agreement with the majority of city council, or I'm not sure. So that we need to have a goal. I mean, Councilor Walker, you've been quiet. You have land out in ag zone. What are your thoughts? I could put you on the spot.
Well, if we want to go back to the beginning of this, I've always felt that if you truly want to farm, you should be able to farm. I don't want to sit here and tell a farmer he's a farmer only if he raises chickens, or he's a farmer if he only raises strawberries. If he calls himself a farmer, he wants to live there and he wants to do it year after year, he should be able to do what he wants and build a house on his land. I disagree when we say 5 acres is not enough. I disagree when we say 10 acres isn't enough. I think anywhere from 3 to 100 acres, you can do anything you want on it as long as you stay within the rules of the city. And that's all I ask to have us do. Allow people to be able to build themselves a small house, do whatever amount of farming they want to do on it, and let them live there. And that's not just South Auburn. I'm not worried about just South Auburn. I'm worried about the whole city. Let them farm it if they want to farm it. Let them build a house on it if they want to build a house on it. They're not going to hurt anybody, scare anybody. Just come up with some good rules, policies, and follow them. We've got people that live on farms that don't do anything except watch the grass grow and the trees grow. We don't kick them off their land. We don't even have that if you thought that, it would be the wrong thing to do. So be careful when we say, well, maybe we'll back up and think about this a little further. All these people were farmers once. They didn't come in and say, okay, I'm old now, I can't farm no more. Give me a permit to stay on my land. We just, am I wrong? We've allowed them to do this for years and years. They still live on their land. Maybe they hay 100 bales of hay, maybe they don't. I'm not out there with a sheet of paper counting. And I'm not telling them, if you don't do that, you got to get off your property. That would be the wrong thing for us to do to our people.
Councilor Gary had her hand up. Go back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought the goal of this committee was to help sustain existing farms as well as to encourage the new younger people or people that want to get into farming to help remove the barriers and the restrictions to encourage the growth. I mean, that's what all the meetings I've attended, that I thought the goals were already clear. I mean, the different committees have done great, but I just think we need to continue on track of what we're doing. Because like the mayor says, food insecurity is a big problem. Also, food distribution is a big problem because we do get food, but it's not getting to all those that need it.
I'm going to come right back to you, Mr. Carrier. Councilor Titus, you're up next. And
Yeah, I want to just reiterate what Councilor Walker had said. When we first started this process, I think there were two common threads. One of them was to help farmers who are already existing farmers operate their businesses better. And then I was hoping, and I thought maybe better use of certain ag zone areas that are no longer, that can be maybe rezoned for other uses. Now, whether they could be or couldn't be, I thought a committee would help decide that. We certainly don't want to build on land that's going to hurt natural resources, but having 60% of our land mass zoned ag, there's got to be some portion of it that can be used for a different purpose without destroying the environment. But nobody wants to go down that road because it seems like that's the third rail. It's resource protection now. We can't build anything on any of that land. It's got to be saved.
I'll use myself as a real-world example. I was
40%.
my backyard
40%.
My backyard is an agricultural resource protection zone. I didn't know when I bought the house. I was made aware of it about 4 years afterwards. Actually, the majority of my land. I have no plan to develop it other than mow the lawn and watch trees grow. It's there. But now I got a $600 tax credit or break when I didn't have that before. So that means somebody in this city is subsidizing me. Someone in the city is eating that $600. Mm-hmm. If you look all up and down strip zoning throughout Auburn, West Auburn Road, okay, you're looking down south, you're looking at strip zoning where the house plus the first 500 or 600 feet, I'm not sure the exact distance, your front yard and your home is all in rural residential or low density country residential. Your backyards are being subsidized by someone else. And if you ask those people what they do, even if they know they even have their backyards in ag land, they probably don't. You know, ask them if they want to develop their backyards. 99.9% of them are going to say, it's my backyard. It's where my dog runs. Nothing's going to change. But at what cost is that? It's something to think about. I know $600 is lost from the city's coffers because my backyard is in that zone. If I had my way, I would take it out of that zone. For no other reason why, I just think it's not fair that someone else is subsidizing my property, my existence. Okay, I'm not a big fan of that. I just hope my wife's not listening right now when I say that. So that is something to think about as well between strip zoning, and I think this is something I'd like to get some agreement on from the council for a hard look, a strategic look, either within a revised comprehensive plan or not. The benefits and cons of strip zoning, and what we have, and if you look at the zoning map, what kind of mindset is going on, what kind of pattern do we see when we're going from suburban residential to low density country residential to rural, residential rural, which is only an acre, and then back to ag, and then back to industrial. If we're supposed to be minimizing sprawl, where can we grow? Or do our zones make sense currently? And is a fair distribution of tax dollars gained and spent with this strip zoning, if you would?
And I'm just going to say again, we have goals. We know what our goal is. We had a goal when they brought this to us, when you folks brought this to the planning board. Our goal was to look at the rules and see how we can bring them up to date and still utilize the district for what it is. Our job is not changing. We're going to approve a farm if it meets the definition of the current regulation or a future definition of the regulation. I think the issue falls in is what the council wants to put in the ordinance that either restricts or promotes the farming. You can leave it the way it is and it'll restrict it, and there won't be any other growth, which would be fine because we're doing a resource protection. But if you're looking at growing something, then the council has to make up its mind, do you loosen up the regulations for it while still making sure that it's a farm by utilizing your committee or giving the rules to the planning board and some teeth to the city plannings to be able to enforce it. But we have rules right now that are doing this, so I guess it falls to you guys, you have to set the regulations that you want us to enforce so that we can apply them to the zone.
Let's keep in mind, it might help as you do your work to recall what happened with that beautiful farm that I used to bring my students to, right in the middle of the city. It was right across from what's now the Auburn Middle School. I don't know what happened, what transpired in that land ordinance, whether things changed, whether now they're paying, I'm assuming they're paying, bigger taxes because now you have buildings that were put in this farmland. The farmland was abolished, it's all gone bit by bit, it all took, it was gone, and now we have we have sprawl. I count that as sprawl, and all of the homes that have been built there are pretty congested. There's a lot of homes. So let's think of the two things. There's a lot of facets. There's a lot of good points made around the table here. I think we want to preserve our resources to the best of our ability. We don't want to lose them. I felt sad when we lost the farm, and I thought that, wow, right in the middle of the city, we're probably the only ones who have that in the United States, which I believe we were. And so now we're looking at what do we do with the property. Mentioning the Amish people, I would be welcoming them because they want a lot of land because they are going to farm. That's their essence, and we would have great food as a result of it. So I think if we have a balance, there are many places here in Auburn that can still be developed in terms of housing. We need to look at that and weigh that against the land that is protected right now. And the other good point too is, some of us are subsidizing those who have, protected land. I know I pay a lot of taxes for a small piece of half an acre, that's it. And so there's all of that. So it's an anonymous task that you're going to undertake, and I know you will all do it, very seriously, but there are all those facets that need to be considered. What do we truly want for this city? We don't want to lose our resources, but we want to be able to
Use them.
use them.
But I'd like to counter that a little bit. I think that's an example of not sprawl. That's an example, that's within the concentric circles of development of this community.
Sorry, what are you speaking of? I'm sorry. Are you talking about the Auburn Middle School?
Talking about the farm, or you're talking about the one that I mentioned, or?
Yes, I'm talking about the
The
farm.
Hatch Farm, the Merrill.
Caught within, a growing suburban, almost urban area.
It's very urban.
Right, but that's not sprawl. I mean, the use of that old farmland, it was being compressed with growth around it. That land became very valuable for other uses, which turned into, an ongoing development, actually, with Pinnacle Heights. So that's not sprawl. That's growth within your concentric circles.
Define what you think sprawl is. What is sprawl in your mind?
Well, I think our mayor talked about the pinnacles that go out with, zoning a strip outward from the city and extending that further and further out. So, no, I just wanted to counter that thought of that farm that was getting squeezed because it was within the concentric circles of proper growth. We had the infrastructure of water and sewer and so forth that was readily available. The school right across the street. So that's not sprawl.
I was going to,
Or, actually, Ms. Moss?
thank you. I was just wondering if Eric could chime in to say if there is a definition of sprawl that we could use that would help the conversation from a city planning perspective, rather than us continuing to speculate.
In
That's a
general,
good question. Thank you for that.
In general, it's just as development moves away from existing centers of development, sort of establishes a new node of development in areas that are not served by utilities and public services. So if you can fill in either close to an existing center of development or within an area of development where there's infill lots, and this farm would be an example of a large infill lot that happened. Usually they're much smaller, but I would say that's not sprawl if it's already in an area that's surrounded by utilities and services.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I was just going to say the same thing. I was hoping that, again, the committees and the study and all that would tell us, is there land available within that circle as you're talking about? Not sprawl, but if we were going to grow and expand out, it would be to grow and expand out as close as we can to existing city services. And that would be something that I would hope the research would show. Okay, we have this area that's 200 acres and it's over in this area and it's right very close to existing services, and it won't take that much more management by the city because it's not as much sprawl. Anything that's outside of the center, as you're right. I don't agree that we should stay right in the center all the time. I think we do have to grow some. But I was hoping that this committee would be looking and targeting areas like that and making recommendations. If this area looks like a good candidate for housing, this is a good candidate for something else. This should be preserved. This should be preserved, and this preserved, and help us so that we can make a decision on council rather than do it on purely economic reasons or our own agendas. We have information that somebody's given us that says this area would be best for more housing, this area is best to stay alone for, whatever. But since the inception of that study, I've not heard anybody come up and say, this is what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I say, Councilor Titus, if you read what the proposed ordinance is, it doesn't have to do with this group making a decision about where development should happen or not happen. It's making recommendations.
Right, people would come to this committee and say, we'd like to build here, and this committee would say, well, maybe you should or maybe you shouldn't.
Well, within the ag zone and
Right,
around.
I'm talking about the other way around, identifying areas. A committee that would identify other areas and say, and then bring it to council, say, we think this area should be rezoned so that you can have more houses here. Maybe instead of 10 acres, they only need 3. And this area, where here it is, and here, it's a certain, and give us the information so we can make a decision to grow, smartly.
Chairman, sir?
Okay, so, and I'm going to speak not on behalf of the board. I want to make it very clear right now, I'm speaking as an individual. This whole discussion started, this specific discussion that we're having right now started with the planning board's desire to see some clarification from the council on possible metrics and goals that they would use to measure any changes to the ag zone against. We're hearing a discussion that has already been taken up, and it was taken up in the comp plan. The comp plan was quite clear that there are areas of the city that do need to be decoupled from agriculture, and that agriculture and conservation are not necessarily congruent and shouldn't be conflated. And so, as an individual, I would ask that as we move forward, we look to things like the comp plan to provide that clarity, and that we have sort of the courage to move forward and implement the comp plan. Mr. Levesque spoke about his own situation. I can speak about mine. I live on West Auburn Road. I have a little over 4 acres in the ag zone. It stretches down to the Spring Road, and we're one of the properties that owns halfway into the Spring Road, so we have sort of a keyed access to the locked area. I have access to tremendous natural resource of the city, and the lake is right there. I have the Spring Road. I have the ability to access the back of my property by the Spring Road, which I would hazard to say 99% of the citizens don't have. But ultimately, despite the fact that that land is used for conservation, it's currently used as conserved land and it's used as a buffer for the lake, it's zoned agriculture, and quite frankly, there would be nothing from stopping myself and my neighbors if we employed best agricultural practices from intensively farming that land with livestock.
Absolutely.
So I guess my concern is that by not recognizing that there's a need in the city for areas that are conserved, and that we shouldn't conflate conservation with agriculture, we would continue to perpetuate a situation in which we falsely believe that resources like our watersheds and Lake Auburn are protected by a zone. They're only protected by the agricultural zone because my neighbors and I choose not to engage in agriculture. If we chose to, there's nothing in the ordinance that would stop us, though. And so, as a citizen, I'm going to take this opportunity, as a planning board member, I'm going to take this opportunity to say that, to me, it's a real concern. And so, when I hear where are the areas that we should be developing, I say we need to look to the comprehensive plan. And when we look at the comprehensive plan, we see that it was very clearly laid out that there are areas that should be conserved, and that the ag zone, as we currently know it, was not the appropriate tool to do that. My concern is that we are so focused on continuing to promote the natural resources aspect of the agricultural and natural resources zone that we lose sight of the fact that it is absolutely within our ability to decouple those and create two separate zones, one of which is appropriate for areas conducive to agriculture, and one of which protects those resources that we feel need to be protected. And I apologize for, I know I'm sort of using a finger-wagging tone here, but I feel strong, I feel passionately about that, and it concerns me as I'm hearing the conversation go on that hasn't really been touched on yet, that this is clearly laid out in the comprehensive plan, and there's a vision set forth for how we can do this.
Well, I think one of the first things that's said in this proposed ordinances is review the comprehensive plan, city ordinances.
But we can't delegate our duties to another sub-board. We have to
I
make
thought we
these
had moved
decisions.
beyond the, I apologize, I thought we had moved beyond the Ag Advisory Committee. We were specifically speaking about the things that the planning board wanted to bring up to the council. So I appreciate you adding clarification to that. I just want to make sure that time is short, and I have a list, and I asked my members to voice their concerns, and I want to make sure that all of the things that they wanted to have brought up during this get to be brought up.
If we could, let's go through then, okay, and let's keep going through your list, because I think that's important to look through
Well,
for
may
the
I
future.
just ask that it's appropriate for what we had mentioned earlier, that Peter and myself and some people from the group get together with some planning board people and look at sort of the flow chart idea that you're talking about, and that's something that we can move forward with.
Yeah, I think these are great ideas. With regard to the Ag Advisory Committee, with regard to the Ag Zone proposed changes itself, it's important for me to state that it was the planning board is asking if the council could work on developing a set of goals and metrics through a similar process that we utilize, so that we can better understand the future vision of the council with regard to that zone. One thing that came up several times was the idea that we would like to have regular joint either meetings, or if they are not, that these could be workshop meetings, that they could be non-workshop meetings, but that we have regular meetings. And if I remember correctly, it was touched on some of the effect, possibly at least twice a year we talked about, 3 times. So, okay, and that's the thing, on the board there was some discussion about minimum, maximum, but it was really clear. All of us feel like these sorts of meetings are really important for us to be here, to be able to talk to you, and for you to talk with us. And for instance, I'll throw Mr. Walker is quite diligent in attending planning board meetings, and he's expressed at our meetings in the past some of his concern with lack of communications. And I think that if we have more meetings, we'll develop that communication, but it'll also foster sort of the personal relationships that help us work together.
Let me address that. I mean, looking at maybe 3 might be a little bit too many, considering the amount of commissions and committees we have that we have to meet with. I think 2 is something that is a noble goal that we should plan on, okay? And if time allots, or in a case-by-case situation, depending upon what the subject matter is, maybe a 3rd would be necessary. We'll bring this out to the council. just for a workshop item in our next meeting, just to talk about too, maybe, every 6 months or so, well, maybe a winter, summer meeting, so we can look at that. Council?
Oh,
Makes sense?
absolutely. I think it'd be a
We
great
tried
idea.
doing this before. For some reason, it never happened. I think certain councilors thought that it wasn't needed. We want to not get in your soup, so to speak. But to hear this is great, and I think we can act upon it, okay?
I appreciate it. And so, again, these are not directives from the board. These are things that we're asking for. We'd like your opinion on these things. One topic that came up was the strategic plan process. And the desire to discuss that process with the council, understand what the process was. We understand that the strategic plan is still in process, but that as the board, we recognize that we're an entity of the city, and if the city is to adopt a strategic plan, we'd really like to be apprised of that process and ultimately the final strategic plan, because that will inform the work that we do. So perhaps because it's still in process, maybe we could get, if it's possible, someone from the council who's involved to maybe come to a planning board meeting and discuss it, or else provide written materials for us to review, and then perhaps when it is adopted, that become another joint workshop.
Let me address that. We're looking right now at establishing a date, either August 26th, 7th, or 8th, if my memory serves me correctly. A survey has gone out to kind of roll out the finalized strategic plan from the strategic planning committee prior to it going to city council for debate. Let's make sure that, obviously, a copy of that, and everybody's invited on the rollout. We'll let you know what date that is, everybody in the planning board and anybody else for that matter. We'll make sure you all have a copy. And Mr. Manager or Phil, if maybe a presentation of that strategic plan to planning board specifically might be in order.
Well, actually, what we're looking at right now, at the request of the council, is to have a workshop with the council on August 19th. If in fact we decide on one date in August to have a workshop with the council, maybe we invite the planning board the same evening. And then at the end of August, the idea was to have the final wrap-up meeting at the Hilton, as we did the opening meeting of the process. So that's the plan at this point in time, and we are working hard on that. And Phil, I don't know if you have any additional comments you want to add. Feel free.
I would just add so the next step is the draft is nearly complete, and the strategic planning committee will be the next step in the process. That group will come together, review the final document, and then we'll do the workshop on the 19th. So we're in the final stretch anyway, presenting it.
The workshop on the 19th is for the council,
Yes.
but it would be important, I think, also to have the planning board in there before a final rollout, just to hear.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting is that the planning board be invited to that workshop on the 19th, so they could participate.
Because that's after you will have compiled all of your information.
Right.
It makes sense
Yeah.
to me for the 19th.
Another topic was discussion of the comprehensive plan. I hope we're all aware that it's sort of up next year, and it's something we've talked a little bit about on the board, but it's something obviously that we would work in conjunction with the council on, and so we would need, I think the board would appreciate some direction from the council as to how large a role they would like or expect the planning board to take in that process. So if we could hear back from the council sooner than later on that, that's something that we're hoping to. Yes, Mrs. Boss?
And I would add just as well the timeline for that process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, Mr. Manager, if the council has not seen a timeline for that process yet.
We are still talking about that timeline. We do not have any money budgeted in the CIP for the comprehensive planning process for FY20. Our thinking was that we would put some money in for FY21, and in the meantime, we can start a dialogue with the council and the planning board about that process.
As a personal aside, again, I'm going to speak for myself and not the board, I think it's incredibly important that we begin that sooner than later. We've had instances at the board where the members have suggested that perhaps we wait for the implementation of the new comp plan, which on its face seems incredibly reasonable, I think, and a responsible thing to do. We get left in a tight spot because it's the responsible and right thing to do, but it's something we're unable to do because there's no, at least discussion that we've seen in terms of moving forward, developing. Do we even like the comp plan as is? Yeah, should we anticipate drastic changes, things like that? And those are the sorts of things that we, as the planning board, really need to be thinking about when we are making decisions and making recommendations, particularly on things like the ag zone. Something that's come up on the planning board continually over the years is that city ordinance stipulates that the planning board is supposed to be part of the CIP process. And we have asked that it be a part, and I would say that we've asked over the last 3 or 4 years. And those requests have been met with collegiality, I think a desire to reach out. We've been given the CIP budget. Unfortunately, by the time we're given the CIP budget, it's at a point where it's in its first or second reading. So at least 2 members of the board at the last meeting sort of expressed that, and it's something that it does come up periodically. I know that a previous member was a real proponent of us getting involved in the CIP process because it sort of puts the planning back in the planning board. And so asking the council to have a discussion on how amenable they are to involving the board earlier on, if not the whole board, perhaps a subcommittee that reports back to the board.
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject here, you don't need city council approval for this. It's clear, section 2-475, section 7.7, to offer its recommendations to the city council with regards to the compatibility of the city manager's proposed capital improvement program with the comprehensive plan.
Right, and we've done that, but in the past, we've been given the CIP sort of after the point where it can be revised. So we could provide our input, but at that point,
I mean, it's just as clear if that's the case, if they're unable to do their job with the timing, we need to adjust their timing.
Yeah, this is not a hard one.
I agree. I think this is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, we can,
Right.
certainly during the steps that we have in the process, we can invite the planning board in at the right time so that you have an opportunity to weigh in and have some input before we get to the point where the council has to make a decision on the CIP. And we should.
And that might be a good timing for our next joint meeting, because we usually have a workshop on CIP proposed items. Joint meeting there, 30 minutes on that, move on to other issues.
I think that would be great.
That way
Yeah.
we all see it at the exact same time.
Yep, that would be excellent. Thank you very much.
Let's review that prior to then, but I think that probably is an easy fix.
The next 2 items that I have on the items for discussion, I will admit are somewhat selfish because they're things that I put there, but not necessarily the entirety of the board. So before I raise them, I'm going to open it up because I'm about to present 2 items that I think are good for the board, but similar to our last meeting, is there anything that in contemplation since the last meeting to now that any of the members that are present think would be good clarification that the board might seek from the council or cooperation in specific matters that you'd be interested in seeing?
Planning board?
I guess just as a comment, I think when we entered into the strategic planning process, I think at the council level and to the public, we really recognized it was a precursor to the comp plan. I think the discussion around this table tonight, all of it comes back to the comp plan and the importance that we have a comp plan on the books now, needs to be looked at, So it is very important that we use the strategic planning process as, again, the precursor. And I think actually the comp plan actually is the basis of a lot of our CIP. So I think it is important that, planning board should be present for the presentation for the strategic plan. Yes, and I think, we understand that the CIP that comes before council review is based upon the comp plan, because that really is laying out the plan for the city over a number of years. So when we address infrastructure and so forth, the needs to support it or expand it, it should be based on the comp plan. So the comp plan, the update, is becoming very, very important. I think we've emphasized it tonight. And, I think even this discussion with respect to the agriculture and resource protection zone, we can tweak it, but I think the real issue of identifying whether we want to change the name of it, split it out, ag, resource protection, I mean, that's the whole discussion that needs to go through that comp plan study, which is a big process. I mean, if it's going to be the same as in the past, it's been with a consultant, it's been with, a large group of people starting at least. It tends to dwindle towards as we go through. But I think we're seeing that has to be important agenda item that we need to move ahead on.
A lot of things have changed in 15 years just in southern Maine. I mean, we have to keep up with that. We talk about that farm. I met a family this weekend who just relocated here from Falmouth. They bought a $450,000 home, and they're single without any children. It's great. And they're happy with their tax rate. And they're going to commute to Portland. Just things that didn't happen much 15 years ago. So, 9 years ago, I'm sorry. Was it that long? 9. I'm thinking 15 was a charter. But 9 years ago, things have changed. So it is. I think it's time to look. Is there, I'll turn this over to the city manager to comment. He's done quite a few of these. Is there steps that can be taken or a schedule that can be implemented and reviewed that does not require the capital expenditures up front? I'm not saying it doesn't or won't. In other words, instead of waiting till fiscal year 21 appropriations, is there anything that can happen now that is close to free?
Well, I think as the chair of the planning board was saying, I mean, we can start a dialogue now, we can have some conversations, and as Councilor Hayes said, we've already had conversations during the strategic planning process. When we do the workshop presentation to the council and the planning board on the 19th, you'll see included in the elements of the strategic plan a lot of aspects that are part of the comprehensive plan from 2010 and some ideas that may be new, but the basis of it, I think it's fair to say, is a comprehensive plan in a lot of ways. So we'll start the dialogue. Frankly, what I'd like to do is, and we've already started some conversation at staff levels, have more conversation with Michael Chamings, Development Director for the city, and the Deputy Development Director, Eric Cousins, and Phil, and other folks, and start talking about what's the best way to proceed. It will require an investment. I've been involved in, I think, 4 comprehensive plans, maybe 5 in my career, and it's a major undertaking. Councilor Hayes, I think you served on the last comprehensive plan, if I remember correctly.
Too long. I think it goes back to an earlier one, actually.
So it's not a simple process. It's an important undertaking. And we'll come back with a workshop on it.
What's the average cost for a comprehensive planning process, or what has the cost been in the past?
Oh, Katie, I'm hesitant to mention a figure. Yeah, I really would like to explore that a little bit more. Eric, any thoughts?
Just from the last process. The last process involved about 40 residents appointed to the committee. About 25 stuck it out for the entire 18-month process. A lot of public engagement is a lot of what you're buying with the consultant services, prepping and outreach. It was just a little over $100,000.
I wonder if it's possible to even just get a proposed sort of timeline of when certain things should be happening, even in the first year, which should not cost anything, just as Chairman Sear said, you know, it'd be nice to know when we're supposed to be participating in this. And those of us who are new to it, we really need to know.
I appreciate the comment, Councilor Lasagna. Again, give us a chance as staff to talk through this and come back to you with more information. I'd like to do that.
Before I jump in, again, any issues, items?
Yeah, anything else? If not, we're gonna recess here before our regular city
Okay,
council meeting.
I'd like to throw out the following then. As a member of the board, who,
I'm just joking, keep going.
oh my gosh.
It's a workshop.
This guy, you know, really. As a member of the board who's involved in the creation and implementation of the form-based code, I would put that well at the top of one of the top 10 most important, influential things the board has done in the last, I would say, even decade. I could tell you that the board had not planned for the form-based code to sort of end where it did. It was our intention that we continue to revisit it, and I would really like to hear from the council, and it doesn't have to be right now, as to whether or not they think that would be amenable. At the very least, that they would be willing to hear suggestions from the planning board if we choose to take it up on our own. And the next thing.
Well, Chairman, sir,
Yeah.
on that note, just to recap, I mean, obviously you are living and breathing this stuff, but form-based code, correct me if I'm wrong, basically we're talking about increasing density of our urban core downtown, correct? Through setbacks and height and so forth?
I think actually what is aimed at is preserving an aesthetic while allowing for development.
Okay.
So such that an example might be, the most famous example people in this area might think of might be the Freeport McDonald's. Does not look like a McDonald's. Because it was required to conform to a specific form. The building, so it wasn't specific to the use. The building was dictated by form, and so that allows for diversification in the city while still maintaining an aesthetic that we'd like to see. The example might be this side of Court Street versus the north side. The north side looked like the south side at one time. I think attitudes changed, but given where we currently are economically, most people would really love it if the north side looked similar to the south side, because we would have maintained our New England downtown aesthetic. And so that's what the form-based code was meant to do. And as we talk about moving forward with development, I think I would really like to see us revisit that.
Could I jump in on that? Because I've been talking about that when I see our new construction going up, and I take a look at the outside, and I'm going like, okay, that doesn't fit. That doesn't match what our city looks like. Spring Street is a beautiful, beautiful building inside. I went to the open house, but I was very dismayed when I saw the outside appearance, and you're in between a bunch of buildings that have beautiful brickwork and embellishments. I believe that if we're within city limits and we want our city to maintain its integrity and its architectural uniqueness, we really have to give thought to that. And I always use places like Newburyport and Portsmouth and just walk through those communities. And that's what they've done there, and it just is beautiful. So I would like to see that be emphasized.
Mr. Engler, it looked like, were you interested in making a comment?
No, I just support.
I'm sorry, you were leaning forward, I thought. Okay.
No, I'm just enjoying the conversation.
About 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just mentioned this is another thing, form-based code. It would be important for the city council to understand what that is. I participated in some of the original planning process, and it would be good for us to understand what you are working on and think is important, and so that it can inform things like what Councilor Fournier said, that building does.
Because
fulfill
those are
that.
the decisions you make, those, you give approval to that. And I kept saying to myself, where does it stop? Where is it not, the message not going through further before construction takes place? And then we end up with something totally different than we thought we were going to get. Is, to me, the downtown area, all of the downtown, north, south, all of that, within city limits. If you walk through, needs to have a nice feel to it, a nice ring, and it needs to blend, you know.
Well, let's absolutely have that conversation. I think you've got enough consensus here to look at that more. I would add one thing, though. Since the implementation of form-based coding, what has the success been, and how do you define that success?
Yeah.
Just so we have something to look at in the future.
Exactly. In terms of defining success as well, I think it's also worth thinking about what could have been had we had form-based code. I think about the,
Project
is
on
it
Main
Dollar
Street.
General or General Dollar, or
Yeah,
that went
Dollar
out by
General.
the Stevens Mill School. The credit union essentially looks like the school didn't maintain the aesthetic. Wouldn't it have been nice if we had a form-based code to sort of dictate that, that aesthetic be maintained? So-
Exactly,
and
exactly.
for the record, that's not downtown, if you guys
Oh, but-
catch.
Yeah.
Seems more and more downtown
You could
as
include
we're
the
getting
perimeter.
there. Okay, so that's great. I think, first of all, I think this is a great start. We talked about a lot of stuff. I think we have some, on both ends, we gave some direction, received some kind of direction, and we need to execute and do some follow-up. Okay, so we will over the course of the next couple of weeks here. I want to thank the planning board members who came. Thank you very much for being here, taking time out on a Monday. I know you're not used to Mondays. And the city council, we're going to break for 5 minutes, get this room back in order, and we're going to continue with our normal council meeting.
Great
Okay?
meeting. It's a
Thank you.
great meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
for
folks.
inviting
Thank
us.
you. Have a great night.
coaches.
Okay.
Probably sooner than later.
I'd like to call to order this meeting of July 15, 2019. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no consent items today, so we're going to be moving on to minutes of the June 3rd, 2019 regular council meeting. Are there any corrections?
July 1st.
I'm sorry?
July 1st.
Did I say June 3rd?
The date.
July 1st. Wow. I just want summer to go forever, don't I? We have the minutes of the July 1st regular council meeting. Are there any corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the July 1st
Motion
meeting.
to approve.
Second.
And a motion for Councilor Walker and a second for Councilor Fournier. Show of hands, all those in favor? Okay. Minutes are approved, 7-0. Moving on to communications, presentations, and recognition. Okay. Now, if I can find my microphone, bear with me. I'd like to recognize the 2019 members of the under-12 Auburn Suburban Babe Ruth softball team. That's you girls in the uniforms. Come on down. Okay, so thank you, girls and coaches, too. Coach Morin, who helped me out today, bring me up to speed on everything. Let me just read this proclamation if I could. Let it be known that 11 Auburn girls have been participating in the Babe Ruth Softball League on the Auburn Suburban Girls U12 team. Many of them have been together playing since 2017. And whereas, since 2017, they have worked on skill development and played teams for much larger cities throughout New England who have practiced year-round. And whereas, after facing challenges and setbacks, they plan to work hard year-round on their goal. And whereas, during the winter of 2017, a girls' indoor softball league was formed at Auburn's Ingersoll Arena, allowing these and over 250 girls the opportunity to hone their skills and compete regionally. And whereas, their determination and that of their coaches and parents have helped them cinch the state title in 2018 and again in 2019. Through suffering regional losses, they continue to hone their skills at Ingersoll from October to April of this year. And whereas this, the 35th anniversary of the Babe Ruth softball, these 11 girls of Auburn won the state championship, securing the distinction of being the very first Maine softball team to attend a World Series tournament. And whereas this team truly represents the culture of sport that the city of Auburn has enjoyed and fostered for these past 150 years. Now therefore, I, Jason Levesque, Mayor of the city of Auburn, on behalf of the entire city of Auburn, commend the team and all those involved in their hard work and wish them the best of luck in their future games, knowing that in our eyes, they are already world champions. So congratulations, girls. And I've got we have the counselors and city manager handing out T-shirts. Make sure y'all get one. If they're not the right size, we're gonna have to make do. No, we'll get you different ones. Just let us know. A couple things. A couple highlights here. You're all traveling to Florida Friday? Friday.
A week from Thursday.
Okay. So this is gonna cost how much?
We'd like to raise $30,000.
So $30,000 to send this team to represent the state of Maine and the city of Auburn in the Softball World Series, U12. Okay, how can we help? Is there a website? Is there a way that people in the city who are watching this can actually help with contributions?
Checks can be sent to Auburn Suburban. We have a GoFundMe page set up. We can share it on the city website.
Okay, we'll share that. Thank you very much. We'll share that. We'll see if we can spread the word and get this out because you all need to represent Auburn well because you're going to win, right? Not those bullies from Alabama push you around. Okay, let's get some pictures if we can with the families. Got counselors back there. Counselors, come here. Where do you want me?
Right there, right in the middle. Nice and even, excuse me. Makes it nice and even.
We ready?
Camera.
Hey, congratulations again. Go out there.
Welcome, thank you.
Congratulations, you gals. That would have been my daughter.
First team from Maine in the World Series. That's pretty good. That's-
Is it alive?
And Liz, we'll get him some more if need be. I'll reach out to him. Okay.
Yes.
Next, we have a presentation discussion on the proposed Library Avenue design with Eric Cousins and Zachary Lenhart presenting. Hear this. You need to hear this.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thanks for receiving an update on this one. Zach and I just wanted to provide a brief update on our progress on implementing a capital improvement plan item that is also part of the CDBG budget that was approved by the council. The Library Ave Troy Street area has been a target of investment for both housing, but also during that process we recognized the need for improved pedestrian improvements and additional parking in the area. So as part of the CIP this year, there was $270,000 proposed, $135,000 of that. I think Brian is going to have a graphic up here on the screen. This shows the general area for this capital improvement plan item. You can see the railroad tracks is kind of the reddish line through that area. Troy Street is just to the north, the green line, and Library Avenue is that line that's sort of all by itself right in this area. As you know, we've redone Hampshire Street recently here, and this would be a continuation of those quality pedestrian and business-friendly parking improvements that have been done along Hampshire Street. There is a public meeting scheduled for July 24th to engage the neighborhood in how those elements are designed. Council and Planning Board are certainly invited as well, and Zach can talk a little bit about the CDBG budget portion.
The current design that's at kind of the 50% that we're getting input for at this open house is funded by last year's CDBG budget, the design portion of it, and then we have $135,000 along with the $135,000 in the TIF funds to carry out some portions of this plan.
Is that it? Is there any questions from the council on this? I think this is a step in the right direction of trying to solve some potential parking issues during max capacity at the library. Okay.
I know we have, you know, some entrepreneurs who've been waiting for this meeting, and I'm very thankful that it's being held, so that way the questions can be asked, and maybe we can, you know, provide improvements and stop gaps where it's needed in some cases. So it's, everyone wants that same spot.
And I think as we work through the Court Street study as well, there is a lot of parking within a distance that people in other cities walk on a regular basis. And as we can make it more comfortable for people to move through those spaces, they can access more parking and help resolve that problem.
Thank you for holding this meeting. It's really important.
Thank you very much. Okay, is there any other further questions? No? We'll watch it and we'll see what the results are of the public meeting. Thank you. I'll now open up the first open session of the night. Members of the public are invited to speak to the council about any issue directly related to city business, which is not on this agenda. I'd ask that you state your name and address, and please limit your comments to about 3 minutes. Nobody? Okay. I will now close this open session. Maybe, okay. We're going to go to unfinished business. Next, we have order number 80-07012019, authorizing the issuance of bonds for the Norway Savings Bank Arena. This is the second reading. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved?
A motion for Councilor Rosani. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Second for Councilor Hayes. I will now open this up for the public hearing. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak?
Joe Gray, Soapers Mill Road. Just wondering if this is still in an enterprise zone or if this has been abandoned, if this is an enterprise fund or not.
Mr. Manager or Michael?
It's a good question that you're asking, Joe. You know, obviously what we're trying to do, we want to break even with this operation going forward in the future as best we can. In my eyes, you know, what we're trying to do is we are trying to improve this operation.
Mr. Manager, is it in the enterprise zone or not?
Well, what Joe's asking, are we treating it as an enterprise fund? Is that what you're asking?
That is, yes.
Enterprise fund.
Okay. We are treating it as an enterprise fund, if that's what you're...
So it will pay taxes.
People are helping to support the arena, yes. Because we're not able to break even at this point. We are hoping that we will...
In the original contract, it was going to pay taxes after a 5-year hiatus. It was going to start in the 6th year paying taxes. I'm just curious as to whether that's still in effect.
It has been...
Ms. Eastman?
It's been paying taxes since the arena was built. Jill, do you want to add any comments?
The building was taxable, and it has been taxable. When the city buys it, it will no longer be taxable. However, while it was taxable, it was 100%, the TIF was 100% reimbursement of the taxes for the first 5 years. So there was no tax dollars to the city for the first 5 years. And then it reduced down to 75 for the next 5, 50 for the, from 10 to 15, and then 100% after that. So that will go away. Yeah,
right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any other comment? No? I'm going to bring this back to the council. Is there any debate, questions? This is our second reading. The first reading passed 6-1. Councilor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm still not supporting this. On paper, it may be the right thing to do to refinance it so that supposedly there's costs that will be savings. But the first time this came up for a vote back when we were talking about building this, the plans kept changing. There was no concrete data. And it seemed like it changed from meeting to meeting. Currently, we're voting now to take it over. And even though we've discussed some stuff in the back room, there's still no real portfolio that people from the public can look. The person that we've got now in charge of Norway Savings, he's got a good reputation of making things happen. But he himself, after seeing that PowerPoint presentation, there's no set documentation of a plan moving forward to grow the business, to make this even more self-sufficient than it currently is. I agree that this type of building is needed in order to put on the different type of events that we need to have in the city, to bring people to the city, as well as giving Auburn residents a venue to go to attend different events and for sports and for public skating and things. But if another business came forward and wanted us to give them deals or help them with their finances, we made sure that everything was documented, and we saw documentation. Going forward, at this point, I have not seen enough documentation, so I cannot support this. Also, I think that the public should have a right to decide whether they want to move forward with the bonding of this. The city of Auburn only has a certain pot of money going forward. Auburn taxpayers can only afford a certain amount of taxes. We've got a lot of things coming on our plate. Since we're going to be bonding as much as we are, I would like to see this have gone out to the public for a vote.
Very good. Is there any other comments or clarifications on Councilor Gary's remarks?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor Zania?
I think financially it does make sense. I do question, as Councilor Gary does, a real plan that we have seen about what, I've seen bits and pieces, and I think there are many good ones, but there's not been a plan that has been put before us in terms, it can come after the bonding, but I would like to see it.
Mr. Manager, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. There is a plan with activities that we've had. We are working on formalizing that into a business plan, and we have a meeting coming up in the near future on that, as a matter of fact. So I think that we are headed in a very positive direction in terms of what we're doing.
Thank you. Is there any other comments? Councilor Forney?
Joe, I agree with the previous two councilors in terms of the plan itself, and I think that if we had increased workshops, I mean, this is one of the departments that I think we need to have regularly scheduled workshops so that we can keep track of, you know, what kind of revenue we're taking in. We have had increased activity, and it's been great. I've attended, it's been wonderful. But at this point, I would like to see more ongoing activity, other programs. I know it's hard to get out there, and if we don't make that happen, and doesn't happen with any amount of aggression, and as far as aggressively pursuing people to come and have their activities here, then that money that we're going to put in will not have been worth it if we don't start seeing ourselves in the black.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring up this variable, and I find it very interesting, and I want to thank city staff for putting this in. And I'm going to read it directly. Since the arena opened its doors 5 years ago, the area immediately surrounding Norway Savings Bank Arena has had a $15.1 million growth, $7.5 million in alterations to existing buildings, and $7.5 million in new construction. A long-term corporate sponsor recently expressed how they have seen a significant increase in sales this year and contributes to growth to the events at Norway, and as a result will be increasing their sponsor amount. I've heard that myself from a lot of sponsors, frankly, that I've tried to ask for money for the 150th, and they're already sponsoring something at Norway. Part of me is like, darn. The other part's like, well, okay, good. But we are, I think the point here that staff is making, you have your direct, quantifiable, net loss or profit on this arena, but you also have hard to quantify, and it's a challenging and kind of ambiguous to quantify economic impact of the surrounding area. What businesses are there that might not be there, might not have renovated, might not still be open, that need the patronage of the Savings Bank Arena in order to function effectively? And then how much tax dollars do we get from that? Okay, so that's the economic multiplier that I think we need to really look hard and try to figure out more so, instead of just looking at a singular line item of profit or loss for one venue. Okay, so I just want to bring that to everybody's attention too as you're contemplating your final decision. Is there any more comments or questions?
I got one for you, Mr. Mayor. The Norway Savings Bank Arena, 5 years ago when it started, was a definitely big question in everybody's mind. But a short time after we opened the doors, we were lucky enough to have the Norway Savings Bank themselves step up to the plate, put their name on the building, and have sponsored us without question to this point. As we sit here and question, is it worth moving forward, going on, keeping it, and making it part of the city, I think means a lot to them. I haven't spoken to them directly, but I remember when they did their big open house up there and celebrated the big day with us, they were proud to be part of that skating rink. And I was proud that they stepped up and did what they did for us. So I feel that there'll be more that will step up and will do some of the same things they've done. I think it takes the team that we have in place now to make this happen and to make it better. So I do support this going forward.
Okay. I'm going to ask for a vote at this time. It's going to be a roll call vote, so Sue, if you could, please.
Counselor Young?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
No.
Counselor Lasagna?
Yes.
Counselor Hayes?
Yes.
Counselor Titus?
Yes.
Counselor Fournier?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
Order passes by a vote of 6-1. Okay. Moving on to new business. We have Order 85-0715-2019, authorizing the cancellation of the first regular City Council meeting of August 5th, 2019. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
So moved.
Second.
Motion from Councilor Fournier, second from Councilor Walker. Open this up to the public. Does anybody from the public like to speak on this? No? I'm going to bring it back to the council. Council, we kind of been talking about this now for several months, right around after budget season, about looking and trying to forecast some time that's applicable for majority of the council to take a vacation, if need be, during the summer months. This is, I'd like to, City Manager, if you could talk about municipal government in general, like, for example, Lewiston and other municipalities, do they do this? Is this a normal course of event?
It is a pretty normal course of event. The city of Lewiston, for example, is having one meeting in July and one in August, so it's not unusual.
Okay. I mean, of course, we work harder than they do. Put that on the record in the minutes. Any other comments, questions from the council? Councilor Titus.
Yeah, thank you. I personally am against this. I just think we've got a lot going on. I can't believe that our slate is so clean that we can afford to do this. However, if we have, we're not going to have a quorum, or a lot of people are off and are not going to be around, I almost see that, but I haven't had any proof of that. I just can't believe that we have, we're all caught up and everything's all great that we can take a meeting off, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Councilor Walker's reaching.
I'd like to make a comment. I wish this would have come up 4 months ago, so we could have sat here and debated who should take the time off in June. June was one of our most important dates, and yet we had people that took vacations at that time. It's all great that people want to take vacations, but June is not one of the months that a councilor should take a vacation. So, objecting to taking it off in August after the vote for the budget is got done, CIP is done, a lot of other things are out of our hair, it's time to breathe. I agree with this 100%.
Okay. Any other comment? And again, maybe this is starting a precedent that, can, based upon the amount of work, I think there's always going to be a ton of work going on that we can look at maybe earlier next year. Okay. Anything else?
I agree with Counselor Walker. I held my vacation off until August, first week of August.
Very good. Okay. I'm going to bring this to a vote. All those in favor, all those in favor of the order, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Order carries 5-2. Next, we have the order number 86-0715-2019, casting votes for members of the Androscoggin County Budget Committee.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I make a motion that the Auburn City Council cast their votes for the following individuals to serve on the Androscoggin County Budget Committee in District 5, Leroy Walker and Larry Pelletier.
I have a motion from Councilor Zania to nominate Leroy Walker and Larry Pelletier to the Androscoggin County Budget Committee. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Titus. Lasagna, second for Councilor Titus. I'm going to open this up to the public. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Mr. Pelletier, would you like to speak against your nomination? No. Okay. Or against Councilor Walker's? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the council. We obviously can go into executive session if someone deems fit. Is there any debate on this?
No, I think both individuals will serve us well.
Very good then. I'll bring this up to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed?
Vote for
None
yourself.
being unanimous passing of Order 86-0715-2016.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that the Auburn City Council cast their votes for the following individuals to serve on the Androscoggin County Budget Committee in District 6. That's Auburn, Poland, and Mechanic Falls, Andrew Titus, and Philip Kroll.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Zania nominating Councilor Andy Titus and Assistant City Manager Phil Crowell to represent District 6 in the Androscoggin County Budget Committee. Please, someone from the public, if you'd like to speak against Councilor Titus, come forward now. Darn. Bring it back to the council. Does anybody in the council would like to talk about this? Of course, we can go to executive session if need be. None being, I'll bring this to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstained? None being? The nomination passes by a vote of, or unanimous vote. Okay, congratulations. Mr. Manager, could you just explain the nuances on this post-nomination so the public can understand this a little bit better? Nuanced.
It is. What the council has just done is prescribed by the charter of the Androscoggin County government, and in doing so, there will be representation from the city of Auburn for District 5. In the case of District 6, actually, there are 3 communities that are involved in that: Auburn, Poland, and Mechanic Falls. And there will be a little bit, perhaps, of a contest regarding that. I know we've looked at the formula for that. Phil, you've looked at it more closely than I have. Anything you want to add regarding that?
I would just state that the commissioners have a process to evaluate each of the nominations. The only way that, they'll look at casting their ballots. Each town is doing the same thing, and then the commissioners will use the Appendix B within the charter to determine how the votes are cast.
And there are 2 per district, correct? 2 individuals per district.
2 representatives per
Right.
district. 1 needs to be a municipal officer.
Right.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. Next, we have ordinance 10-07152019, amending the sign ordinance for official business directory signs. This is the first reading. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Forney and a second from Councilor Walker. Is there any public comment on this issue? Not being, I'll bring it back to the council. Councilors, any conversation?
Pretty cut and dry.
Pretty cut and dry. I'll ask for a roll call vote. Please, Ms. Clerk.
Counselor Young?
Yes.
Counselor Gary?
Yes.
Counselor Lasagna?
Yes.
Counselor Hayes?
Yes.
Counselor Titus?
Yes.
Counselor Fournier?
Yes.
Counselor Walker?
Yes.
And the ordinance passes unanimously. Okay, now we're going to go on to reports. Okay, first off, excuse me, I don't want to take my mic away. First off, my report, a lot of good things happening in the city. First of all, we had a phenomenal last Tuesday night Chevy car show. A lot of counselors were there, a lot of members of the public, press. More importantly, there were people there from all over North America for 1965, 66 full-size Chevys, and yeah, that's a thing. That is a thing. They take it seriously. Beautiful cars.
172 or 3, though, that was there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was
Did they
pretty
push them
cool.
way out to the outside,
A lot of
though,
people
or?
came to me and wanted to say, I want to vote for that car. And I said, you can't because it isn't a 65, 66. But it was a beautiful car. It's a Caprice Classic. Oh, my God, beautiful. But it wasn't a 65, 66.
It was some great.
But it was a great car.
It was a great night hearing from people, from residents of Auburn, so it was quite the show. I'd like to give special thanks out to Liz Allen, Communications Director for City of Auburn. She did a great job putting this together. And Sabrina Best, as well as Jody, who was out there. I think everybody in the staff really had a big impact on a small event that has a lot of impact to a lot of people. On that note, though, it's interesting. I wanted to share this with you. The gentleman who is the current president of the club is from New York State. He's a regional director of Chamber of Commerce's. And he was just tickled pink with everything. They do this every year around the country. He said Auburn he's never seen a city more helpful. He did give some advice, though, and I think it's kind of some common sense advice. There was no one person at the Chamber of Commerce to help facilitate their needs and their travel. They used Auburn as a base of operations for a week-long trip throughout Maine and little day trips here and there. Also said it would be really good if the city of Auburn had visitor bags, if you would, introductory bags, welcome kits that hotels could give out to people from away, selected groups, or just en masse, giving more information about the area, where they could eat, and so forth. Little things like that for low dollar amounts, I think, can have a big impact, and especially if we start talking more about tourism and sports tourism. So if there's anybody ever doubt the fact that we actually have tourism in Auburn, last Tuesday cinched it for me. It should cinch it for a lot of people. It's there. It might not be cruise ships, but it's something. Moving on, we had, I want to just talk about a statement right now I want to make about an activity that happened last week. So I'm going to read this statement, and this is going to be public after tonight. On July 8th, residents who own or live in land that is entirely or partially located within the Agricultural Resource Protection Zone received a postcard notification from Bates College encouraging participation in an online or soon-to-be-mailed land use survey jointly commissioned by the City of Auburn's Conservation Commission and Bates College. According to the city's charter, Section 2-480, governing the Conservation Commission powers and duties, paragraph 2 states, shall conduct research in conjunction with the planning board into local land areas, which shall be initiated by majority votes of both the commission and the planning board. No land use research can be conducted without the majority approval of both the Conservation Commission and planning board. No vote was taken by either group authorizing city participation. After initial discussions with Bates College Professor Eames, the controlling agent of the survey, it appeared that members of both groups participated in the formulation of questions and or had knowledge and plan to use the data attained to assist in policy making, all of which is a direct violation of our city's ordinances contained within our charter. It's my responsibility and that of all elected members of your government to abide by and enforce the charter and ensure that our processes established by law and reinforced by precedent are followed. Therefore, the residents who have received the survey must be reminded that if they have or wish to complete it, the data submitted will not be used in any decision-making process by city staff, elected or appointed officials, and no city resources have been or will be utilized in conducting the survey. It's also my hope that the City of Auburn can strengthen its relationship going forward through a comprehensive standard operating procedure, ensuring that this type of charter infraction does not happen in the future. Bates College is an asset to the community, and we have a long positive history of working together to achieve common goals, and I'm sure this will be the case going forward. So I'll send this electronically out to all of you, city staff, and post it publicly, just so we're all in the same understanding of what's going on. If there's any questions, please direct them, I think, to city staff at this time. They can actually help you understand that better. And I just want to make sure that the people residents of Auburn are aware. So thank you. That's it for my reports. We'll move on to council reports. Start off to my left this time with Councilor Young.
Yes, I report that the corporate track state meet will be held in Scarborough on Saturday. The second Triple Crown race, Emily Fletcher 5K, will be held on Sunday. And the state USATF will be in Lewiston on Sunday, too, also, following Emily Fletcher. I'll attend 2 out of the 3 events.
Very good, thank you. Councilor Walker.
Yeah, we've got a couple important meetings coming up tomorrow. The Bell Tower Committee will meet here at 4 o'clock in the bump out, which is right here in the same floor that we're sitting on right now. We'd like anyone that would like to attend to please come and be part of the meeting with us. We're going to talk about how we'll move forward for some fundraising, and we'll just throw a lot of ideas and thoughts around and see what would be the best way to move forward to raise money. The other thing is the Age Friendly meets tomorrow night at the Hasty Community Center at 5:30. So come on down. That's open to all ages and all age-friendly people. So if you're friendly, come on down and join us and have some fun. It's always a great time to get together with that committee and talk about things moving forward in the future. July 20th, that's a Saturday, we will be having a spaghetti dinner. And that dinner is to help the United New Auburn Association to raise some money to help run some of our programs for the New Auburn people as well as the kids. That has to do with Halloween, Christmas time, and all the other events that we do. This will just help us with our money to be able to do these, and we work side by side with the City of Auburn trying to put these events on, and we have a great time at it, but we're a little short of money to continue to do this without help. So 4:30 to 6 at the 6th Street Congregational Church. We will be there. Kenny Blaze from Rowley's Diner is our chef, so come on down and eat plenty of spaghetti. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Fournier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the last school committee meeting, I did provide a succinct listing of all of the things that have occurred, with the city council. But I did ask 2 questions that are of concern to myself and some of us. And that is, number 1 was the graduation rate. And the numbers right now are unofficial. And I spoke with curriculum coordinator, and she indicates to me that it takes a while for all of this to be processed at the state level, and that she would be presenting a workshop to the school committee as soon as she has all of that information. The graduation rates are, for 2019, have fallen a little bit since last year. And my concern is the percentage of students who have graduated, and that's 78.71%. And one other piece of it is that 30.4%, which is 17 students discontinued school. I think we need to be very concerned about that, and on top of asking questions as to why we have that kind of a rate, and I think that there are things that we can probably do and help out with. And I plan to meet with the superintendent regarding that. I will share the information with all of you once I get the updated results. Did I give you the end-of-year review? Did I send that to all of you? Okay.
I received it.
Okay, if you did, just take a look, and if you don't have it, let me know, and I'll get a copy to you. It's the end-of-year review, and I did speak to this before, in terms of the assessment results. Those two are below state level, state average, so we have a lot of work to do. The other question that I asked was for a list of all of the staff who have left at the end of this year, what their position is, what building they worked in, and as well as that, I would like a list of all of those individuals or positions yet to be replaced, so that I've asked for a succinct report on that, and I haven't yet received it, but I will also share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councilor Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of points, and then I have a couple of reports. One of them is I've had some people ask me about swimming areas in Auburn, and I've also been curious, because I know that one count I don't know if it was the last budget, we talked about there was a great deal of money was going to be spent to try and use outlet. But I guess I would like to have at some point when we have our next workshop, whenever that is, something with the rec department or rec advisory committee could help us determine what our options are if we want to have any kind of public swimming in Auburn. I know that we were talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, or maybe there's something less. So if there's an update, I'd like to have that. So I know we have a couple of options, and maybe council should be looking at that. The other thing I had somebody ask me about also was the situation with the ball fields over on Garfield Road. Are we losing?
Okay, that rumor comes up every 8 months, and I've talked to the Maine National Guard, so as in a lot of other city staff.
Yeah.
No truth in that whatsoever.
Okay.
Hasn't been for years. So, no.
Okay.
No,
Very good.
emphatically no.
So we can, that can be confirmed, that there's no, that it's a rumor.
Yeah, it's the rumor that I literally hear every 6 months since I was elected.
I did have 2 meetings coming up this week. On Tuesday will be the Sewer District Trustees meeting, 4 o'clock at the trustees' office on Court Street. And on Wednesday will be the Water Trustees meeting. And in light of the last few days, I do wanted to get a report from our superintendent, and then I want to add a little bit of my own. But the superintendent asked me to read this. The Auburn Water District experienced 4 water main breaks over the last 5 days. The breaks occurred at Spring Street, Center Street, Turner Street, Myatt Avenue. Given the nature of the breaks on Center Street, the affected customers were issued a boil water notice. The water was tested, and the order has been subsequently lifted. The water distribution system is closely monitored by district personnel, as well as 24/7 monitoring by a SCADA system that reports trends and parameters such as water flow, pressures, etc. The system is also computer modeled, so we can hydraulically model flow throughout the system and identify potential problem areas. At this time, the district, as well as our consultants, are working diligently to identify the root cause of these breaks and implement corrective action. Throughout this process, we are committed to ensuring that we deliver clean water to our customers that meets the drinking water standards. We would also like to thank our customers for their patience and understanding. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, aside from that, is people talk about our infrastructure, and water rates always come into play, and why can't we get our system in order? Just wanted to explain that our current system right now is we build infrastructure with cash on hand. When they run low on cash, that's when they need to go up on rates to build up cash reserves to put more pipe in the ground. This allows them not to have to bond for infrastructure. Right now, we're currently up to a mile and a half per year of new pipe replacement. A couple of things gets in the way there. First of all, we have probably 30 miles of pipe that eventually is going to have to be replaced. Secondly, we always prioritize with any road projects, whether they be the city or the state, so that if they're going to tear a road up, we're going to put in new pipes if they're old. That'll be a priority over anything else. In the past few years, that's taken up a lot of that mile to a mile and a half of pipe. So because of that system, funding is not, I mean, the other thing they do also is they use in-house folks and equipment to do the pipe replacement, which saves quite a lot of money over having a private contractor do it. So there are other options, though, to look at, which would be to step up our process, bond for it, get everybody on board to do it quicker, but then we'd have bonds, which, of course, that would raise rates as well, but it might stabilize in the end. But infrastructure costs money, no matter what you do. The Water District trustees are fully aware of the issues that are going on. It's been on one of our priority lists of many, water quality being near the top. But I think we'll be now stepping up a little bit and looking at other options. On Wednesday, we will start the process, but on August, our August meeting, we're going to have quite a devotion in our workshop to what to do. But as far as putting new pipe in the ground, that's how they do it. They try to do it with cash. And if that continues, that's fine, but it is going to be still a slow process to replace what we have. I don't know how many total miles we have, but we have a lot of pipe that needs to be replaced right now. So I just wanted to add that so that everybody knew how the system was, but we are going to work towards, and we have a good group of people that will look at pragmatically at other options, I promise you, especially in light of 4 breaks in 5 days.
I know.
Very good.
Yes.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you very much for that update. It wasn't very good. Chaos. Councilor Hayes.
From the airport, some things are happening, some things aren't happening. Unfortunately, the parking area that was hopefully going to be started soon, actually the National Guard was hopefully going to be part of that, but we didn't rank high enough to get their support of the project, and bids that came in were more than double the original estimated cost. So that's at this point been being reconsidered, maybe to make it a smaller scale project than the larger. What is happening is the Constellation, now wrapped or boxed, actually is being moved out of the terminal, which means Elite is getting busy. They need the space in the terminal, so Constellation is outside, but not to be moved, I understand, until September, that it will be making its way for transportation to Germany.
One question, Councilor
Yes.
Hayes? I noticed that plane that was along the road
Yes.
is tipping up now. It's like,
Yes.
is it, or tipping down?
Well, that was
One of the-
subject to quite a bit of conversation at our meeting. That plane, and because part of maintenance is actually, as we've been told, is some of the planes that are being retired, they bring them in and they do extract the parts that can be reused elsewhere. So that is one of the planes that's non-flyable. Parts had been removed. They wanted to get it off the asphalt because of the traffic coming into the airport. Eventually that plane's to be crushed, but the airport manager is making a different area for those planes to be moved to, so they'll be out of sight.
If you could, I'd like to pass along, and I think this might be a little bit of further discussion warranted on the council's end. Instead of scaling down the project, the parking project, there's obviously 2 rules of thumb. I'm sure you've debated it. You can take what you currently have for capital and then do something not to standard, or you can go back and do something to standard. I think the council needs to be probably part of that decision-making process, because we're seeing this trend happen from our cold weather storage building to probably everything else we put out to bid in the next 12 months. So I think it's worthy of a conversation of doing things in half measures of what you can afford, or just not doing it at all, or doing it to standard.
Yeah, I think a lot of the cost was in, again, drainage. So I think if something is done, it'd only be a part of something that would be fully developed at a later
So
time.
phased versus,
A phased,
okay, very
right.
good. Again, still, I think we all need to start thinking about this. This is a new reality. Bids are coming back extremely high. And labor's tight, cost of doing business is expensive. By the time we get a bid on something and a year later we fund it, or 2 years later, things change. So, thank you very much for that report, Councilor Hayes. Councilor Zanya?
On July 23rd at 5:30, the School Building Committee will be getting together to do their post-referendum kickoff at 5:30. And then at 6:30, the Building Committee will convene and they will talk about membership on various subcommittees that will help to move the work forward, including those that will advise, and perhaps the city manager can remember all of them, but will help advise the construction group, that will help work with the athletics department, that will work on fundraising, and then work on connecting the what is moving forward with the high school with the community in terms of facilities use. And anybody's welcome, and I'm sure they would be happy to have people participate on those committees. There are probably a number of people on the building committee who feel like their work is done. I also was able to attend the planning board meeting last week, and the issue of the Bates Research Project did come up, and the planning board had some discussion about it and decided that it was actually just an honest mistake in terms of how the whole thing played out, and that much of it was because of a lack of training. And I appreciate that Assistant City Manager Kroll is going to make a priority to work with the boards and committees to ensure that there's adequate training so that people do understand sort of ethically and in practice what is appropriate in terms of their work.
Councilor Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's weighed heavily on me what happened last week during our open session. I wish things could have been held different. I know that you start our open session saying that comment is limited to 3 minutes, but sometimes there are exceptions to the rules and people are allowed to speak a little longer. When the events occurred with Mr. Herrick, I think I was more doe in the headlights because I couldn't believe what was happening with the interaction between you and Mr.
I was like,
Herrick.
Councilor Gary, this time, and we've gone through this before, this time is for reports. Reporting on committee work, reporting on what's happening in the community.
Well,
If you want to use this time to criticize the way I handled that meeting then, this is not the appropriate venue.
I'm not so much going after criticizing you, but I want to admit that I probably should have done something instead of just sitting back and letting the thing go on. It takes a lot of humility when a constituent comes in and brings up an issue and then comes back and says when they are wrong. I'm trying to show the same integrity of saying that I should have interjected and should have forced the issue, just allow him to finish speaking. I regret that the situation calls for such extreme measures by you, for you to have the chief take Mr. Herrick out.
Thank you very much for your report. Turn over to the city manager now for their report. Mr. Manager?
Councilor Gary, are you done? Was there anything else you wanted to say? On a different topic?
We're not, at this point, we're moving on.
Mayor, I just want to see if there's something else you want to report on regarding city activities that you may be involved in, or?
Other than the First Auburn Seniors is meeting this Wednesday for their regular meeting, and they're going to be having a KFC luncheon. Those that wanted a luncheon had to call Mr. Pippin or the rec department to order it, so there may not be an extra dinner available for them to purchase because they had to have a head count by a certain date. Also, membership dues are also due this month. So please make arrangements if you come to have your money for your dues. First Auburn is a great senior, one of Auburn's great senior groups. They historically meet usually the first and third Wednesday of the month, and because of the holiday, couldn't this month because the 4th was the day after their meeting, so they canceled the meeting. So members didn't have an opportunity to pay for their dues, and they may not have known that they had to have called ahead for their dinners. And thank you for your kindness for letting me continue.
So for my report, I want to report on the Battle of the Badges blood drive. I see the fire chief here and the deputy police chief. And I can report that the fire department won by 2 points. It was a narrow win, and there were 45 units of blood that you were able to accomplish, and you reached your goal, so that's great. I also want to report that National Night Out is on August 6th at 5:30 p.m. on Main Street. There will be live music, free food, giveaways. It's a good event for the community, so I encourage people to take advantage of this opportunity. I'd also like to mention that the Farmers Market on Main Street on Wednesdays is going on. It's going very well from 4:30 to 7 p.m. And don't forget the concerts that we have with the band, which begin at 7 p.m. in Festival Plaza. And lastly, I'd sent an email out to all of you, to the council and the mayor regarding the Maine Municipal Association question on the recycling legislation. I need to have an indication from you as to whether you would like to see us be involved in that, and I know that you all have some thoughts regarding that, and I'd just like to see if there are any comments anyone wants to make. The MMA is interested in knowing whether municipalities are inclined to try and see if the state would provide the majority of funding to help offset costs for recycling programs.
Yeah, Mr. Manager, I don't think this is an appropriate forum to take a vote on that or indication, but we can bring this up in a workshop in August meeting.
We can certainly do that. That is an issue that we're working on. We have an ad hoc recycling committee that we're trying to form, so I appreciate the
maybe they can
interest
take
in
this
the
up
input.
too and report back, because I know from what I've heard from just several members of the council.
Mr. Mayor, will we still have time to weigh in on this?
Oh, from a legislative standpoint?
Yes.
Yeah, this is ought to consider next session, correct?
This is for next session.
Next
That's
session,
correct.
so yeah.
Yes, you do.
Plenty of time.
Yes, you do.
So
Thank you very much.
it'll be on our next agenda?
Maybe
I'll
not
be
the
in
next
September or October.
Okay, very good then. We're going to be moving on here to open session. Last open session of the night. Members of the public are invited to speak to the council about any issue directly related to city business, which is not on this agenda. As you state your name and address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Hi.
Hi.
Adam Lee, 87 Western Prom. I hope the council and the mayor takes very seriously accusations regarding violations of municipal law. I know that I do. And when making such accusations, it's incredibly important to be precise and accurate. What I heard in the statement earlier from the mayor was that there was a charter violation. That's not a citation provided to the charter. The citation that I heard given was to an ordinance. That's an ordinance violation. That's 2-480. Sub 2, I believe, is the ordinance that was cited, which says the commission shall conduct research in conjunction with the planning board into local land areas which shall be initiated by majority votes of both the commission and the planning board. I heard additional language which is not in the ordinance, and so that statement therefore would be inaccurate in an accusation that was made. The language that does follow sub 2 is sub 3, which says that the commission shall seek to coordinate the activities of conservation bodies organized for a similar purpose. I'd also cite you to 2-482 sub 7, which provides that the commission can communicate and coordinate with city staff, planning boards, and other community programs to avoid duplication of efforts and to combine resources to meet goals. I didn't hear any idea that the Conservation Commission was conducting independent research. What I heard, it was coordinating with other community members, other community groups, in order to not duplicate resources and contribute to that work of conservation. I think it's incredibly inappropriate to make accusations of violation of municipal law when those violations didn't occur. I think it's problematic to use the position of authority in order to attempt to silence individuals from the public, individuals from our committees, and Bates College. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody else in the public that'd like to speak?
Joe Gray, Soapers Mill Road, and I'd just like to piggyback on that a little bit. It was also stated that the research or the survey results will not be used by the city, and that's very short-sighted. If we're getting good results or good information, why would we not want to use that?
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Good evening.
Evening.
Kathy Shaw, Soapers Mill Road, Valley View Farm, and Four Season Farm Market. I wanted to update you folks a little bit on what's going on with the Farmers Market in Auburn on Wednesday evenings from 4:30 to 7:30 rather than 7. We have 5 committed vendors that come every single week, and I have 2 spots for folks who want to be temporary or what we call day table vendors. These day table vendors pay a fee for their attendance at market. We've had great positive response on that as well. I do have nonprofits coming in every now and then, and our traffic count, our head count for customers coming into the market has increased at least 6-fold from our other situation. We didn't want to move from New Auburn. I really believe that is going to be a good site, but for now, this has been an excellent move. Our customers are happy, our vendors are delighted, and it's nice to see more activity being concentrated in that downtown area, creating community. And I'd also like to make another comment. A few months back, I sent a letter, an email that I received from the State Tax Office regarding land use taxes. And I will resend that document to everybody because it deals primarily with tax perspectives on land that is not developed, land that is kept for conservation, recreation, forest, and farm. And the rates that those are taxed at, and the reasons that they're taxed, and the effect that that lower tax rate has on municipalities. It's not a subsidy, and you can smirk.
I'm smiling.
No.
Not smirking. There's a big
No,
difference.
there's a big difference with your smile. That was a smirk.
Kathy.
We can all differ on our opinions, but this comes directly from the state that says if we increase our tax base, we're going to lose the state subsidies that help our schools. That's an important factor. Anyways, thank you folks for your time. I appreciate it. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public that would like to speak? Not being on the, oh.
I'm Bill Sylvester. I live at 1128 Riverside Drive, Auburn, Maine. Sorry about that thing. I'd love to have a survey, but I did hear that we were willing to work with Bates College to do something, not create a cold spot. But Peter Crichton and Phil Crowell and I talked in January and again in April about the strategic plan and how ag might get into that, ag or forestry. And I wrote Phil a letter that said, well, he said, maybe you could give us an idea of where you think we'd be if we had in the strategic planning initiative a group that worked on forestry or agriculture. So I did, and I don't know where that went, Phil, but you say that's going to end up here in a month, and I don't think there's been much activity on that.
I would just report that that was presented to the Strategic Planning Committee. I can follow up with you later and talk about I go back and look at my notes on their decision on not including that into their top recommendations. But I can go back and review that with you.
Good, I'd appreciate it. The couple other, I'm sure as things have gone on, I've learned more. One of the things we'd talked about was a Natural Resources Committee. Well, we've bandied that around here in the earlier meeting, the joint meeting with the planning board. Natural resources don't include agriculture at all. Natural resources are water power, that type of thing. Forestry is a natural resource. If you didn't touch the ground, you'd have a forest. But you wouldn't have a farm, you wouldn't have milking parlors, you wouldn't have chemicals, you wouldn't have tractors. When the settlers came here, they found the natural resources, which were soils, waterfalls, temperatures, wind areas. That's the natural resource. So, Phil, I've got a lot more to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sylvester. Anybody else in the public that would like to speak? If not, I'm going to close this public session. Or open session, excuse me. Next, we have an executive session to discuss contract negotiations pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 4056. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion from Councilor Fournier. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Councilor Walker. All those in favor? Opposed? None. We're now in executive session by vote of 7-0. These are good.
I'm insulted by that.
Send that to you. I'm not going
Really?
to post them online
Totally
until
inappropriate.
I'm interested because I don't want to be.
I now declare the council out of executive session. Next is an executive session to discuss contract negotiations with the MSEA pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 405. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion from Councilor Fournier, second from Councilor Walker. Trickery. All those in favor? Oppose, abstain, none being. We're now in executive session. I now declare us out of executive session. And we're just going to hang out here for a little bit.
Need a quorum to adjourn.
We need one
Four,
more.
4 or 5? 95?
Here we go.
Here we go. Okay. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I got a motion from Councilor Titus, second from Councilor Zania. Voice vote. All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.